The Chinese ambassador to Britain has been banned from attending an event in the British Parliament because Beijing imposed sanctions on lawmakers who highlighted alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang. China placed the sanctions on 9 British politicians, lawyers and academics in March for spreading what it said were lies and disinformation over the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in the country's far west. The UK media reported that the speakers of the UK House of Commons and House of Lords have decided that the event with the participation of the Chinese ambassador to the UK should not take place at the parliamentary estate, and that the Chinese ambassador should be banned from the parliamentary estate as well. Well, it's a good move, a terrific move. In fact, Boris Johnson and his party have always been saying that the only way to contain China is to ban and shame China, and that's exactly what they have done. We'll talk if other countries also need to follow suit, because China for the longest time has been denying any wrongdoing towards the Uyghur Muslims and Xinjiang, and any country, including India, if has raised its voice against these atrocities, China has of course responded with its mouthpiece Global Times in a very awkward fashion. To talk more about this, joining me on the platform is Ambassador Deepak Vohra, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, former diplomat. Also joining us on the show is Professor Swaran Singh, China and foreign policy expert. Sumit Peer, political commentator, is also joining us. And last but by no means the least, Joyita Basu, editor of the Sunday Guardian, is also here with us. Ambassador Vohra, let me start by asking you a very simple question. Now, what the British have done, it's an intrepid move, it's a bold move, and it's definitely going to have some repercussions, some fallout effects when it comes to the diplomatic relationships between these two countries. But when it comes to trade, when it comes to Europe relying on China, it's not going to be making much of a difference. The question is this a good start or not? And if it's not a good start, then what more needs to be done, specifically by countries like the United Kingdom and Germany, who have criticized China at the onset of COVID-19, but have failed to cut any ties when it comes to trade?
Thank you very much, Mr. Malhotra. Always a pleasure to be with you, to be with Mr. Peer, Ms. Basu, and of course with Professor Swaran Singh. You are a foreign service kid. Your father was one of them of fraternity. Let me begin with an anecdote. China claims to be an ancient civilization, so ancient in fact that they have forgotten what it is to be civilized. This anecdote was many years ago in an African nation. All accredited diplomatic missions received a note verbal, you know what that is, from a very strange kind of thing from the local foreign office, saying that missions should not harbor illegal aliens. This was somewhere in Africa. The concerned nation did have a problem with soaring unemployment. Now, most missions blew up and responded with abuse. How dare you accuse us of harboring illegal aliens? And amongst the most abusive were, you guessed it, China and Pakistan. In our own case, we preferred the diplomatic principle of fin de non-recevoir. That we haven't received this note verbal. Weeks later, the foreign minister of that country told me that he deeply appreciated our measured and polite response and said they had circulated it to all their officials. Now, in September, as you rightly said, Chinese ambassador to London has been banned from the British Parliament, the so-called mother of all parliaments, since China had sanctioned some British MPs over their criticism of the violation of the rights of Uyghurs. The Chinese embassy retorted in the only way it knows how to, with abuse and fury, calling it a despicable and cowardly action of certain individuals of the UK Parliament to obstruct normal exchanges and cooperation between China and the UK, and this is harmful to the interests of the peoples of both countries. Oh, surprisingly, China now says that the British action might also harm the people of China. This is a climb down, since all previous messages was that it will hurt everybody else, not the Chinese, because ping pong is there to protect everybody. So instead of reading the writing on the wall, China's deaf, dumb and blind officials, they are unable to understand criticism because there is no criticism at home. Now, the picture behind me is a Chinese depiction of the June 2021 Cornwall G7 summit. India was a special invitee. This cartoon was promoted by a racket called the Global Times. This is a parody of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, which is, as you know, in Milan, Italy. It includes 9 animals: Australia, a kangaroo; US, a bald eagle; UK, a lion; Canada, a beaver, etc. And India in another picture was depicted as a sick person with a drip, hooked up to a drip, which was a reflection, a comment on the Chinese virus that was attacking us at that time. Don't these fellows know that many years ago in 1936, a character called Dale Carnegie wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People? The Chinese ambassador in Finland has been sanctioned. In France, he was called. In Germany, he was called. In the US, we have it every now and then. Don't these people understand? This is not the way to win friends and influence people. The more you resort to abuse, when Australia said, let's have an independent inquiry into the origins of the virus, what did the Chinese call them? Chewing gum stuck to the boot of China, the white trash of Asia. Is this diplomacy? If it's wolf warrior stuff, it can't be diplomacy, sir. A diplomat knows how to fight, where to fight, and the correct time to fight. And we do it very politely. The Chinese don't. Therefore, I rest my case simply by saying it's so ancient as a civilization that it has forgotten every norm of civilized behavior. This is going to have repercussions. You may not see it immediately. The step has been taken. Chinese ambassador has been told, stay away from the British Parliament, the so-called mother of all parliaments, because you don't know anything about democracy. It's a slap on his face. If I were in his place, I would climb the tower, or whatever that's called, the Big Ben, and jump from it. I don't know if he will. But that's something he ought to be doing, because he's humiliated his country, period. That's not what an ambassador does, sir.
Right. And Professor Singh, that's not what an ambassador does, but that's also not how countries respond when they're criticized. You know, this hypersensitivity manifesting, with these vile articles in response to this admonishment by the world media is basically, letting China shoot itself in the foot.
I think British are often a kind of a benchmark as to how to conduct diplomacy. And you can notice that in face of repeated provocations, and you mentioned global times, response that we see here is a very measured response. Because Speaker in his letter has only said that this is not a permanent ban on the ambassador, but he's relating it to the sanctions which are imposed on at least 5 or 7 members of parliament for speaking. And British Parliament has set the tradition that parliamentarians should be able to speak freely as possible. And in that sense, they want to defend that tradition of almost 400 years plus. Second, I think it's also important to understand that he, in his letter, did not say that ambassador is banned from meeting parliamentarians. He said that they could still organize the same event, which was supposed to happen today, but outside the parliament premises, because inviting Chinese ambassador to the premises when recently sanctions were imposed on parliamentarians would be what he called an insult, and he's using the word insult to democracy and parliament and the tradition of the British. So I see this as a fairly measured response, even in face of, as Ambassador Deepak Bhatia outlined so interestingly, provocations and wolf warrior diplomacy that we have noticed, and enormous sensitivity that China has had on, world talking about what is happening in Hong Kong or what is happening in Xinjiang. Hong Kong, as we know, has a very, very special relationship with the United Kingdom, and they have to, in fact, they're expected to speak to what happens in Hong Kong and to democracy in Hong Kong. And it should be understood in that sense that in extension, they're also talking of other issues, including issues of Uyghurs. But to ratchet up diplomacy the way Chinese very often end up doing, especially in the language, and ambassador's language is supposed to be as finessed as possible. As we often say, if an ambassador says no, he's not a diplomat. So very finesse is the kind of mark of diplomacy. And I think if you look at as a person who studies diplomacy, British have really shown how distinct they are as diplomats compared to dealing with China, which is just a neo-rich, new power on the block, and very often, loses its grain, shall we say, in using language rather harsh on other countries. The best part, as they teach you in best universities around the world, you can make your point without using foul language or without having to raise your voice. So in that sense, I think it's an example of quintessential British diplomacy, of a very measured response. But the point is made and message has been received.
All right. Joyita, do you think this is a measured response by the British? They have also been very vociferous in the past against China. They had zero tolerance for the kind of influence that Huawei was also bringing into the United Kingdom, and decided to ostracize them completely.
Well, Vineet, frankly speaking, I think it's an instance of immense British hypocrisy. Okay, for hypocrisy primarily because they have been playing the both sides of the game. Okay, when I'm talking about both sides of the game, they have been trying to cozy up with China when it comes to business and all that. And when they get hit by China, they say we are not going to allow this particular gentleman to come into the parliament. I mean, measured or not, how is it that they are so measured when it comes to China? And how is it that they are so, uncontrollably belligerent when it comes to India? If you remember, when we are talking about that minute, they start discussing and lecturing us about our democracy and all that. Think of the kind of nonsense that the British Parliament has been talking about. So frankly speaking, it may have colonized us for 200 years or 300 years for all I care. The fact of the matter is that I have no sympathies whatsoever with the British. But having said that, they needed this lesson, and China also. It's a tit for tat. They deserve each other. If you ask me, they deserve each other. Frankly, China has become too big, but it's a fact. I'm just saying, I'm not particularly impressed with what the British have done.
Okay,
the fact of the matter is that if you look at their policies that they have been doing, that the particular Indo-Pacific policy, the document that they kind of came out with, while they are talking about, we understand the importance of Indo-Pacific. At the same time, the trade measures and all, Boris Johnson, he has been cozying up to China. So it is hypocrisy.
It is hypocrisy. That's exactly what I said, Sumit, in my opening monologue as well, that, you can't criticize, admonish and rebuke China, but at the same time continue to, let China get richer. Their coffers keep getting bigger because, the United Kingdom is not going to snap ties when it comes to trade, because they also need China, and perhaps this is all posturing, this is all optics just to, fool the world.
Vinny, the point here is, there are a couple of points to here. The point number one, which is most important point, is that when in the international diplomatic circles, you are snubbed like this, when you are the world's second most powerful economy, second most powerful military, what you claim, and you say you are the people who are going to show the light and wisdom to the world, when your ambassador is literally shown the door, this is a message sent to 1.5 billion Chinese and all their embassies around the world. Because when you breed viruses, when you are in the business of genocide, you can't be in other business. And when you have killed 4 million people, you have destroyed the world GDP by $20 trillion, and you have impacted billions of lives. This is what you will get in each and every country. I have been saying and maintaining, let the virus impact go down. Chinese will be snubbed publicly. This is what is important. Today, what is the news? This not will this so-called ambassador, get into parliament or do a virtual session. The news is that British did not let him enter their parliament and told him, till the time you do not take out those sanctions, you cannot enter our parliament. This is what happened to the ambassador of People's Republic of India, and this is what the news is. Didn't British tell them, get rid of your Huawei gear, you have to reduce your dependence from them? Didn't British limit their entry into UK? And at the right point of time, British quote unquote said, we are ready to send an aircraft carrier to South China Sea. And today, the latest COVID research says the Chinese virus, when the women are pregnant, does not only impact the mind of the mother, it also impacts the mind of the newborn baby. That is the kind of viruses they are breeding. And what do they expect? Red carpet welcome. If I am the Chinese ambassador and I am representing 1.5 billion people, I am representing second biggest economy in the world, second biggest military power, the great Xi Jinping, and I am shown the door. I will not agree with Ambassador Vohra. I will look for a higher thing than Big Ben. उससे ऊंची चीज ढूंढूंगा, I'll jump from there. I'll tell you one thing, when I was a kid, and I was a kid, one day I was a notorious kid, I got slapped by my teacher in front of my whole class. Everybody was looking to me and I was looking like this and this. My friend told me, what happened to you? You know what did I say? मैंने हिंदी में बोला, मुझे तो लगी ही नहीं. I mean, that is the kind of thing that China is doing. You are China, 1.5 billion people, second biggest economy, second biggest military power, and you have been publicly humiliated on the world forum. What तुम्हारी औकात क्या बच गई है? What Xi Jinping is about? Hasn't he lost face today? His ambassador cannot enter House of Commons and is snubbed in public. Oh my God! What more do you get in diplomatic circles? Nobody's going to point a gun to us. Because Britishers are civilized, whatever their hypocrisy and all may be, but they're civilized people. They're not like Chinese, they don't breed viruses like them. So the virus breeders are getting a taste of their own medicine. When you impact so many people in the world, this is what the SOP is going to be. I hope and pray more countries take the lesson from UK and start snubbing the Chinese and show them their place. Where do they go? And this ambassador, is he still in the job? I don't know what material is he made about.
Okay, Ambassador Vohra, another big question is whether this kind of a tit for tat, does it really send a message to China or not? According to Sumit, it definitely does not. You need to do more. This is perhaps something which is going to be slipped under the carpet in just a few weeks or rather days from now. Public memory is very, very short. There isn't anything considerable that the English have done to tell China that you can't do this, you can't do that.
Mr. Malhotra, what Professor Swaran Singh has said, it's a message, and in diplomacy, messaging is extremely important. The world will notice it, and Professor Google, the world's greatest historian, will not let anybody forget this. Let me just tell you, sir, what happens is that whatever we do today becomes a precedent for the future. Now, you've heard of an organization called the World Health Organization, and an American senator even said if you held this character Xi Jinping upside down and shook him vehemently, the Director General of the World Health Organization would fall out of his pocket. Now, what's going to happen, sir, in many years down the road, when there is serious talk about reforming the UN Security Council or whatever, many people will turn around and say, see how China misused its position, and therefore we should take the veto away. These things all have a cumulative effect. Now, the Chinese ambassador to Sweden had attacked the local media, said, you guys criticize, accuse, and smear China. He was summoned to the Swedish Foreign Ministry, and the Swedish are very polite people, more than 40 times. And as per the latest Pew research, China's reputation in Sweden has tanked. In Brazil, the Chinese embassy, their spokesman said when the Brazilian congressman Eduardo Bolsonaro, the president's son, he blamed China for the pandemic. The Chinese said that you have a mental virus that you got while visiting the US. Then Canada, which was a former bedmaid, has been called the running dog of America, and its prime minister has been dismissed at boy. No, sir, this is not diplomacy. This is going to have a long-term effect. It's the first step that has been taken in calling out China. Why the British have done it, I have no idea, but I believe they do want to reclaim their position, their much self-proclaimed position as the grandfather of international diplomacy and international relations. They certainly have a reputation in this. They know how to get around, but this is a very strong message. What will come next depends on the world, but the message, sir, has been delivered.
All right, concluding thoughts from Professor Singh, Joyita Basu and Sumit Peer, and then we conclude. Professor Singh, starting with you, sir.
Thank you. I called it measured because British, if you remember, had recently passed a resolution in Parliament calling what is happening in Xinjiang as genocide. And compared to that, I think this was really much measured than what has happened. And it's been almost 3 years now that this issue of tension between some of these Western nations has been continuing. And, Canada, United States, European Union and Britain had called it genocide. So they use very, very specific words to convey the meaning without shouting, from the rooftop or losing temper. That's not diplomacy. We would remember Nixon had to come all the way to see Mao without even having any relationship with China. Trump twice came all the way to meet Kim Jong-un. In diplomacy, egos and anxieties don't work. You have to really think through and take measured response at each time. And in that sense, I think it's a British measured response and Chinese have received the message. Ambassador personally doesn't have to be much worried about. It's not a reflection on him as an individual. He's done nothing so far which should kind of provoke any response.
Okay.
So I think it's a measured response, and this will continue in coming time. This is not the first and last.
All right, Joyita, 30 seconds.
Well, China has this problem about loss of face. So yes, I think it's going to really bite them hard that, they have lost their face, number one. But at the same time, I'm very skeptical about the British. Because you see, what is happening is that the climate summit is coming up in Glasgow. And the British, they are very keen to get China on board. So I will not be surprised if the British buckle sooner than later. I mean, frankly, I don't have much faith in that country.
Okay, Sumit.
Vinny, in Chinese culture, when you study, it's all about the face of the top man. And whom does the ambassador represent? He represents Xi Jinping. And if if you don't allow him to enter your parliament, you're sending a message to his boss, to the General Secretary of Communist Party of China. Okay. And it is all out and clear. If it is not newsworthy, or if it is not a big news, why would a responsible and a big national channel like you pick it up on your show? This is the news. This is what the world will know. This is what the country will know. And exactly what 6 billion people of planet Earth to know. British showed door to the Chinese ambassador and asked him not to enter their parliament and let others take lesson. It takes just a little bit of courage to send a message much bigger and brighter. You don't have to scramble your jets. You don't have to move your aircraft carriers. You don't have to, open your silos. But do a thing like that and send the message to Xi Jinping wherever he's hiding now.
All right, I'm very sure that this will send a message to Xi Jinping, and I still believe more could be done when it comes to teaching China.
Does he speak English?
Well, we hopefully think he speaks English, but he understands. He has translators and interpreters who will give him the message, which is definitely going to make him think as to whether he should continue to do what he's been doing in Xinjiang for decades now. We take a break.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.